Hi, it's Jeremy from PowerApps. I was inspired the other day when I watched a video by Robin from R2 Power about how he'd created a Power Platform connector to integrate with the OpenAI APIs. I really want to investigate how to do that myself. So this video is going to show you a little bit about what I did with Postman to investigate the APIs and learn what they do, how I created the Power Platform connector, and then how I utilized that inside a PowerApp. You've probably heard of Dall-e, which is an AI-based image generation tool. So when you go into Dall-e, you can just give it a phrase of what you're looking for. And Dall-e will go ahead and generate a selection of images for you to use. So in case you hadn't guessed, I've got a couple of Groodles. They often behave like they're the king of the house. So let me show you where we're going to end up to start with. I've got a PowerApp here which I've linked into the connector that I'm going to build, and there's a few parameters that we can pass. So we're going to say what it is we're looking for. We can specify the size of the image that should get generated, how many images should be generated, and what sort of return type we want. And I just want a URL in this case. Then I'm going to generate the image. It's going to call the API now, and the API is going to return a URL, which is then linked to an image control. So pretty straightforward, but let's begin by having a look at the API itself. So the image generation is currently in beta at the moment. So if you go to beta.openai.com, you'll find information here, and you can just click on image generation. When you look in here, it explains the structure of the API, and it's broken down into a prompt, the number of images that you want, and the size. There is an edit and a variations option, but for the purposes of this, I'm just focusing on the generation side. In the API here, I can switch between different languages that I want to look at the API in. What I actually want is just JSON, so we'll go ahead and create that. If you want to use these APIs, you need to have an OpenAPI key. The way you get a key is just go to your account after you've logged in, view API keys, and then you can create a new key from there. So I'll create a new key, which I will delete after this video has been created. We'll copy it because you only get to see it once, and I'm going to go and paste it into Notepad so that I can refer to it in a minute. So now I've got my key, I can go and start testing things out. There is a playground inside the OpenAI site which you can use, but I found using a tool called Postman better for me in terms of understanding how things work. So you can see here I went through all the different APIs for GPT-3, and I've put in an authorization, which is my bearer token, which is that key that I just generated, and I've got the body of what it is that I'm trying to create. If you're not familiar with Postman, it's quite easy to use. You can go in here and set up collections and workspaces. So I've got a workspace here. These are collections of API calls. So an environment is a way for you to store a variable which you can reuse in all of the API calls. So I've created a variable here called OpenAPI key, and I've just pasted in the value for the key that we just generated. Once you've created your environment, when you're in a collection, just make sure you select the environment in the top right hand corner. And now, if you've put in the variable as the token, so use the two curly braces and the name of the variable that you created, it will automatically get plugged in. So for this example of doing a translation, I'm passing in the model that we're using, what the prompt is. So you'll need to go and learn about how to do prompts. Then you've got some other options here, and if I just send the request, then I get the results back. One other thing to be aware of is to choose JSON as the type of content, and I just use raw and paste in my JSON for the request. So let's look at the image generation API. It's actually really simple. We've got api.openapi.com/v1/images/generations as the URL, and we're doing a post. We're passing the OpenAPI key as a bearer token, and in the body we just specify whatever the prompt is, number of images, size of the image, and the response format. There's two options for the response format. One is base64 and the other one is just a URL. And then optionally you can pass in the name of a user if you want to. So you can see that it's returned some JSON with data and the URL in this case. So one of the reasons that I'm using Postman is in Power Platform you can use a Postman collection to shortcut the process of creating your connector. So all I need to do is just go and save this collection. So I export it, click export, and that will export it to a file. Then in Power Automate I go into data and custom connectors, so that I want to create a new custom connector, and I want to create it from a Postman collection. I can give it a name, choose the file that I just exported from Postman, and click OK. So there's a bit of configuration that we've got to do now. You can give it a new logo if you want to, give it a description. I'm going to use HTTPS and it's already plugged in the host information. In the security tab, in the drop down for authentication type, we'll choose API key. And now we'll put in a parameter label and make the parameter name authorization, and we'll leave header as the parameter location. Then we go to definition. Now for the request, it's automatically put the body in here. So if I click edit, I can see that it's got parameters in the body for the 5 different parameters that we can pass. And it says validation has succeeded. So let's go back one step. What we need to do now is also tell it about the response. So if I add the default response, we need to tell it what that body should look like. So I go back to Postman. I'll just select that JSON, copy it, drop it into the body here and click import. With the code preview, just leave that disabled. So let's click on create connector. Okay, so it says it was successful, and now we need to go and create a connection for it. So I'll say new connection. Now I need to put the API key in. One thing that you need to be aware of is that for these OpenAI APIs, you actually need to prefix the key with the word bearer with a capital B. So you can see here the authorization is bearer space and then whatever the key is that you've generated. So don't forget to do that when you're working with Power Platform. So let me just copy that key again, paste that in and click create connection. So I'll refresh the connections and here's the one that we've just created. So I'll update it again and now let's give it a try. So I'll go back to Postman once more and I'll grab the body from my Postman call and I'll choose raw body here and paste it in, and let's see what happens. And there we go. So the call was successful and I can see that I've got a URL here. So let's copy that URL and I'll just paste it into another tab. And there we go, a white Siamese cat. So it looks like our connector is working and our connection has been successful. If I click on connections, we'll see the connection that we just created. One thing to note that took me a little while to work out is when you go to edit your connection, it doesn't actually show you the current value. So don't be put off by the fact that this looks empty. And another thing I noticed was that when I put the token in there and pressed save, I got a red bar at the top as though there'd been an error. But it turns out that actually isn't an error and it's working fine. So let's have a quick look at how I wired up the PowerApp to that connector. This is a very trivial example. I've basically put some controls on the screen to represent the various parameters that we're going to pass, and then I've got a button which will make the call, and the image is just bound to the results from the call. Let's have a look at the button. I'm setting a variable called image results. I'm making a call to the connection. So in here I've added the connection that we created. I'm executing the method that we specified, and then I'm just attaching the text from the prompt control. I've got a label for the number of images, which I've defaulted to 1. A drop down for the image sizes, and the response format is also a label. And then I'm just passing a username. Obviously this could be dynamic. I've got a text control down here which is just showing us the URL that's getting returned. So because it's returning an array, I just get the first image result, grab the data, and then grab the URL. And then for the image control, it's exactly the same. And then when I run it, I get a different URL and a different image. So I've got a developer tenant configured for PowerApps, and I've got an environment for that. So keep in mind that if you want to create PowerApps that are using premium connectors, of which this is going to be, then you need to have configured that first. Microsoft have just released the developer environment type, so you can actually in any 365 tenant now create developer environments which give you full access and the ability to use Dataverse and use premium connectors. So you might want to give that a try. Just to recap, we've been reviewing the OpenAI APIs using Postman to go and test those APIs out so that we understand how they work. Then we've built a custom connector by importing the Postman collection. We've created a connection for that, and then we wired it up into PowerApps to execute the API and return us an image. If you found the content useful, please like and subscribe, and feel free to leave me a comment. Thanks.